In this episode, we move into a topic that sounds simple at first, but becomes much more important the longer you think about how organizations actually create, store, use, and eventually get rid of information. Data lifecycle management, DLM, is the discipline of managing data from the moment it is created or collected until the moment it is archived, deleted, or otherwise retired. For a beginner, that can seem like an administrative concern rather than a risk topic, but it is deeply connected to security, privacy, compliance, cost, resilience, and business effectiveness. Data does not stay frozen in one place, and it does not keep the same value forever. It moves through people, systems, applications, databases, reports, backups, cloud platforms, and third parties, which means that risk changes over time as data moves and ages. When organizations fail to understand that full journey, they often protect the wrong data, keep information too long, lose track of where sensitive records live, or destroy something they still needed for legal, operational, or customer reasons. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to begin is by thinking of data as something that has a life rather than something that just exists. Data is created when a customer fills out a form, when a user logs in, when a transaction is processed, when a device produces telemetry, or when an employee writes a report. It is then stored, used, shared, transformed, copied, analyzed, backed up, archived, and eventually destroyed or retained under special conditions. Each phase introduces different risks and different responsibilities. Data that is being actively used may face confidentiality and integrity concerns because many people or systems might touch it, while old archived data may create privacy, compliance, and cost issues if nobody knows it still exists. A beginner sometimes assumes security means guarding data only where it is stored, but lifecycle thinking shows that exposure also exists during movement, duplication, reporting, retention, and disposal. The principle here is that protection should follow the data across its whole life, not just sit around the storage system where someone first noticed it. One of the most important ideas in DLM is that not all data is equally important, equally sensitive, or equally valuable for the same amount of time. Some data is critical for daily operations, some is highly confidential, some is legally regulated, and some become stale very quickly. A retail organization may treat payment information, customer contact records, inventory data, marketing reports, and anonymous website metrics very differently because the business value and risk are not the same. A hospital, manufacturer, bank, or school will also have different priorities based on what it does and what obligations it carries. This means lifecycle management begins with understanding the nature of the data itself, not just the technology that stores it. If an organization cannot distinguish between ordinary data and sensitive data, then it will either underprotect what matters most or overprotect everything in a way that becomes expensive, confusing, and difficult to sustain. Good lifecycle management brings structure to that problem by helping the organization decide what it has, why it matters, how long it should exist, and what controls belong around it. Classification is one of the major tools that supports this work because it helps people make better decisions about handling data throughout its life. Classification means assigning categories to data based on sensitivity, value, business purpose, or legal obligation, so that employees and systems can treat it appropriately. A common mistake is to think classification is only about stamping labels on documents, but its real purpose is to guide protection, storage, sharing, retention, and destruction decisions. If certain records include customer identities, payment details, or health information, those records may require stronger access restrictions, better monitoring, stricter sharing rules, or more carefully controlled disposal methods. If another set of data is public or low sensitivity, it may not need the same level of effort or expense. The important principle is proportionality. Organizations should not guess at how to handle data every time they encounter it. They should build a repeatable approach so the treatment of data follows business need and risk rather than habit, convenience, or whoever happens to be making the decision that day. Once data is classified, the next major question is where it lives and how it moves. Data rarely stays in one place because modern organizations create copies in databases, reporting systems, backups, collaboration tools, analytics platforms, cloud applications, test environments, and partner systems. Even a very ordinary business process can generate multiple versions of the same information, and each copy may carry its own exposure if it is not tracked and managed. This is why lifecycle management often depends on understanding data flows, not just data stores. If sensitive records are exported into spreadsheets, sent to third parties, copied into development systems, or stored in unmanaged collaboration spaces, the organization may lose practical control even if the original system is very secure. New learners often imagine that data risk begins and ends with the main business application. But the more realistic picture is that risk follows the data across transfers, transformations, and duplication. A strong DLM approach therefore asks where data originates, where it travels, who touches it, how it changes, and whether every copy still has a legitimate business purpose. Retention is another core principle because keeping data forever is not automatically safer or smarter. Many beginners assume that more data is always better because it may be useful later, but unnecessary retention creates real risk. The longer data is kept, the longer it can be stolen, misused, exposed in litigation, mishandled by employees, or forgotten in old systems that receive little attention. At the same time, deleting data too quickly can also create harm if the organization needs it for operations, audits, customer service, fraud investigation, or legal requirements. That tension is why retention decisions should be deliberate and policy-driven rather than random. Good retention practices connect business needs, regulatory obligations, contractual duties, and risk tolerance. Different categories of data may require different retention periods, and those periods should reflect why the data exists in the first place. Lifecycle management reminds us that the safest data is not always the data with the most locks on it. Sometimes the safest data is the data the organization no longer keeps because its purpose has ended. Disposal is the stage many people overlook, yet it is one of the most revealing parts of the life cycle because it shows whether the organization truly understands when data should stop existing. Disposal does not simply mean pressing delete and hoping information disappears. Depending on the environment, disposal may involve secure deletion, cryptographic erasure, media destruction, record disposition procedures, or managed removal from archives and backup schedules. The challenge is that data often survives in unexpected places, including old storage systems, test copies, email attachments, portable media, and secondary applications that were never included in the original deletion plan. If disposal is weak, sensitive information may linger long after the business purpose is gone, creating exposure without delivering value. From a risk perspective, that is a poor trade. Strong disposal practices require policy, technical support, process discipline, and accountability so that records are removed in a way that is timely, documented, and appropriate for the kind of data involved. Disposal is not an afterthought to good lifecycle management. It is one of the clearest signs that the life cycle is actually being managed. Another key principle is that data should be protected differently depending on whether it is being used, stored, or transmitted. Data at rest refers to information stored in databases, files, backups, or other repositories. Data in transit refers to information moving across networks or between systems. Data in use refers to information being processed, viewed, analyzed, or modified by users or applications. These states matter because risk does not look the same in each one. A stored file may need strong access control and physical or logical protection, while transmitted data may need secure channels and integrity protections, and data being actively used may require session controls, monitoring, or safeguards against unauthorized copying. Beginners sometimes treat security as a single wall around a dataset, but lifecycle thinking shows that protections need to adapt as data changes state. The principle is not to memorize labels for an exam and stop there. The principle is to recognize that the same information may face different threats at different moments, so thoughtful management follows the reality of how data behaves in actual business operations. Data ownership and accountability are also central because data rarely manages itself. Someone must decide why the data exists, how sensitive it is, who should access it, how long it should be retained, and when it should be destroyed or archived. In healthy organizations, ownership does not always mean one person performs every task, but it does mean responsibility is assigned rather than assumed. Business owners often understand the purpose and value of the data, while security, privacy, records, legal, and technology teams help translate that purpose into rules and controls. Without clear ownership, data tends to spread without discipline. It gets copied into places nobody governs. Old reports stay available long after their usefulness ends, and employees make one-off handling decisions that slowly create inconsistency across the organization. For a risk learner, this matters because unmanaged data becomes invisible risk. The organization may believe it has good control because the primary system looks fine, while in reality unowned copies and unclear handling practices create exposure all around the edges where nobody is paying attention. Privacy concerns make DLM even more important because personal information carries obligations that go beyond basic storage security. When organizations collect personal information, they should understand why they need it, how much they need, how long they should keep it, and who should be able to access or share it. This is where ideas such as purpose limitation and data minimization become valuable, even for people who are new to the field. Purpose limitation means data should be collected and used for clear, legitimate purposes rather than vague future possibilities. Data minimization means collecting and keeping only what is actually needed. These ideas reduce risk because they shrink the amount of sensitive information the organization must protect over time. If a company gathers more personal information than it truly needs, it increases the consequences of a breach and complicates retention, access, and disposal decisions. Lifecycle management supports privacy by making data handling intentional from beginning to end, instead of allowing personal information to accumulate and spread simply because no one stopped it. Lifecycle principles also support resilience and recovery, which may not seem obvious at first. Organizations need backups, archives, and restoration capabilities so they can recover from outages, corruption, accidents, or malicious attacks. However, resilience becomes harder when data is poorly organized, badly classified, excessively duplicated, or retained without discipline. During a recovery event, teams need to know which data is most important, which version is authoritative, and which systems must be restored first to support the business. If there are too many uncontrolled copies or unclear retention practices, recovery becomes slower and more confusing because nobody is sure what should come back and from where. There is also a risk of restoring outdated, unnecessary, or even harmful data if lifecycle practices were weak before the disruption. Good DLM, therefore, improves not only governance and privacy, but also operational recovery. It helps the organization separate critical information from clutter and gives recovery teams a better chance of restoring the right things in the right order when time and clarity are both limited. Common misconceptions often make this topic harder than it needs to be. One misconception is that data lifecycle management is mostly a compliance function handled by records teams far away from cybersecurity and risk decisions. In reality, DLM is a cross-functional discipline because data exposure, misuse, over-retention, weak disposal, and uncontrolled duplication all create security and business risk. Another misconception is that a storage platform or cloud provider automatically solves lifecycle issues by offering places to keep data. Technology can support the lifecycle, but it does not decide the business purpose, classification, retention period, or destruction trigger on its own. A third misconception is that once a policy exists, the lifecycle is under control. Policies matter, but real control depends on people following them, systems supporting them, owners reviewing them, and leaders caring enough to correct drift over time. The biggest lesson is that DLM is not about paperwork for its own sake. It is about reducing confusion and exposure by aligning the life of data with the life of its business purpose. A practical way to understand all of this is to picture an organization collecting customer account information when a person signs up for a service. At creation, the data must be accurate enough to support the business and limited to what is actually needed. During active use, it must be accessible to the right employees and systems, but protected against unauthorized viewing or alteration. As it is shared with billing, support, analytics, or external providers, controls should continue following it so that copies do not become unmanaged risk. Over time, some of the information may need to be retained for legal or contractual reasons, while other parts may no longer have a valid purpose and should be removed. If the customer closes the account, retention and disposal rules should guide what remains, what is archived, and what is securely deleted. That single example shows why lifecycle thinking matters so much. The real challenge is not collecting data once. The real challenge is making correct decisions about it over months or years as systems, needs, and obligations continue changing. When you pull these ideas together, data lifecycle management becomes much easier to see as a risk discipline rather than a dry administrative concept. It is the practice of managing data according to its purpose, value, sensitivity, location, movement, retention needs, and eventual end of life. Strong DLM helps organizations protect what matters, reduce unnecessary exposure, support privacy, improve recovery, and avoid the hidden risks created by forgotten or uncontrolled data. For someone new to the field, the most important takeaway is that data should never be treated as if it appears once and then sits still forever. It has a life, and every stage of that life creates decisions that can either reduce risk or quietly increase it. When an organization understands that journey and governs it with care, it becomes far more capable of handling data in a way that supports both the business and the people whose information it holds.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.